In today's exciting installment of How Complicated Can We Make One Project, we'll actually be assembling the silk work bag that was supposed to get done in the last video, the one with all the 18th century embroidery. But, spoiler alert, we'll get tired of not having a pin cushion for the brass pins, and so we'll decide it would be super quick and easy to just make one of those out of scraps while we're at it. So yeah, here we go. If you missed the last video, back in 2020 I purchased this silk work bag kit from Burnley and Trowbridge. And since I have a hand sewing class coming up shortly, I figured it would be good practice. The kit had silk fabric for the outside and lining, a silk ribbon for the drawstring, and some silk thread. I also bought a sewing kit to go with it so that I would have all the things I need to make it, and so that I had stuff to put inside it. The first step in this project was to press the silk and cut it down to size. These are just small pieces, but I do have the selvage, so I was able to square it off of that. Sort of. Oddly, the selvage and the grain were super off. Finally decided that tearing on the grain where I could was probably my best bet. Luckily, it's just a pouch, so it doesn't super matter, but still, not ideal. Once I had the pieces at the right size, I had to fold the edge under to create a seam allowance. Cue a journey into 18th century embroidery, because why not, before we actually get back to making the pouch. Unfortunately, the torn edges frayed a lot while I was embroidering the outside, so I had to count for that as I was folding the seam allowance under. But I was able to match the size of the lining and catch up the fraying on the inside, so it shouldn't make a big difference in the long run. Once I pressed the edges under, I put the outer and the lining together, wrong sides facing, and used a tiny felling stitch to sew them together all the way around. From here, these will be treated as one piece of fabric. Next, I folded what we would think of as the side to make the casing for the ribbon drawstring and hem this down. The silk was lovely to work with here, and I was largely able to finger press my work rather than having to iron it. I'm trying to only catch the linings so my stitches don't show through to the outside, and I feel like I did a pretty good job of that. After that, I folded the work in half and realized that I should have snipped the pouch in the middle rather than folding it in half lengthwise. But since I'd already embroidered it, it was definitely too late for that. So I folded it to keep the embroidery the correct way round, and then I sewed up the sides. Here I wanted more tiny stitches so that they were both less noticeable and stronger. Unfortunately, my silk thread doesn't quite match my fabric, so it's a bit more visible than I would like, but I don't know whether that's a period accuracy concern or not. I'm hoping to get to see some work bags or maybe ask about that in my class in February. Once the step is finished, you feed the ribbon through the casing and make these darling little bows at the end. This took me a couple of tries, but it was well worth the effort, and it catches up the raw edges to prevent them from fraying. I'm really thrilled with how this came out overall, but when I went to assemble my sewing kit, I realized my pins were just going to be pinned through a swatch of fabric rather than any kind of pin cushion or pillow. I didn't want the points catching and snagging the silk, and given how much work I had put into this pouch, I felt it deserved something better than just a scrap of plaid flannel I had laying around. So, to further complicate this project, I made a pin pillow. It was actually a super easy project and just used some of the scraps from the work bag. I cut one of the pieces to about the right size, folded in half, and sewed up two sides using a back stitch. I probably made the stitches a bit more secure than they needed to be, but I wanted to practice the back stitch. I then flipped it right side out, stuffed it with some wool roving, and sewed the opening shut. And now I have the perfect little pin cushion to go with my work bag. I'm thrilled with how this came out, and I particularly love these little bows on the end. They're just precious. I've already started on hand sewing my smock, and it's a lot of fun to have this little bag to keep things into. Overall, I am feeling better about my upcoming class. This maybe wasn't enough practice to get me really good at hand sewing, but I feel like I've dusted off the skill a bit, and I remember more than I was worried about. Also, the smock is definitely building on that. If you enjoyed this or want to see more content like it, please consider just giving a little tap to the like button. And if unnecessarily complicated sewing projects are your thing, or tutorials on how to complicate your own projects, please consider subscribing and following along for the journey. And with that, I will bid you adieu, my favorite viewers. Until next time.